Hey there, everyone, and welcome to Pour and Explore, a wine, food, and travel podcast. I'm your host, Nick Elliott, the wine guy. I'd love to be your go-to guide for all things wine, food, and the amazing places they take us. Here on Pour and Explore, we'll sip, savor, and wander through the exciting world of wine, discuss incredible cuisines, and uncover the stories behind unforgettable destinations. Each week, I'll bring you lively conversations with wine experts, chefs, travel pros, and fellow enthusiasts. We'll share practical tips, hilarious tales, and plenty of inspiration to fuel your next adventure. So grab a glass, pull up a chair, and join me as we pour, explore, and celebrate the good life. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Pour and Explore, the show where we sip, swirl, and wander through the world of wine, food, and travel. I'm your host, Nick Elliott, the wine guy, sommelier, fellow traveler, and your friendly neighborhood wine wingman. Now, if you ever thought to yourself, I like wine, but I don't really get it, or, ooh, tasting room sound intimidating. Today's episode is especially for you. My guest is someone who embodies everything I love about this podcast and this community: curiosity, hospitality, and a deep love for adventure in both travel and in the glass. Ron Higgs, he is a Navy veteran. He's a systems engineer. He's a craft beer enthusiast and someone who went from I can't drink wine without making a face to volunteering in a boutique winery there in Washington, namely in the little town of Woodinville, for several years. Yeah, you could say that Ron caught the bug. You know, Ron's story is proof that wine doesn't have to be fancy or fussy. It just needs to be shared. So in today's episode, we're going to do just that, and we are going to talk about his first wine aha moments in Monterey, California, a place that's near and dear to my heart. You know, what it's really like behind the scenes of a tasting room. The beauty of boutique wineries and little wine communities, a little co-opetition, if you will, and how travel, whether it's for military duty or wine country weekends, can shape your palate and your perspective, people. You've heard me talk about that and how super, super important that is. You'll also hear us swap stories from Monterey and Woodinville, talk about the power of just asking questions and why the lost luggage counter might be the opposite of a wine tasting room. Spoiler alert, it absolutely is. So grab a glass, kick back, and get ready for a down-to-earth, joyfully nerdy, and refreshingly unpretentious conversation. This is Washington Wine, World Travel, and the awesome Ron Higgs. Let's pour and explore. All right, Ron, thank you so much for being on Pour and Explore. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate the invite. Looking forward
Absolutely.
to our conversation.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So I talked a lot about you at the top of the show. I really just want to dive in and talk about some of the fun things that you've done over the years. Your life is enviable as it comes to travel and wine, and you're a Navy guy, which I respect and love. I had planned on being a Navy guy too. That didn't work out, unfortunately, but I will learn a little bit about Navy life from you here today. So I appreciate you being on the show. So as I talked about at the top of the show, you love to travel, and that is my favorite thing to do. So let's talk about your favorite place to travel to, maybe with a glass of wine in hand.
Well, there's a difference, right? So when you travel, we usually go for destinations. You want to go to the beach. You want to go. I'm a snowboarder, so I want to go snowboard. But I have to tell you, my favorite for wine in my hand, is Sonoma area, Santa Rosa. So I'm here in Seattle. Alaska has a flight directly into the Sonoma County Airport in Santa Rosa, which is great. So that is one fantastic place to spend a weekend between Santa Rosa, Sonoma, and Healdsburg, and even far west, I think it's Guernsville, where Corbel is located. So great area to have a great few days with a glass in your hand.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As my listeners know, I'm a huge Pinot guy and a huge Chardonnay guy. I love those wines. They're definitely at the top of my list. And the best place in California for those wines is absolutely Sonoma County. So you commuted from Seattle, you went down to Sonoma from time to time, specifically Santa Rosa. You've been to some really cool boutique wineries up there. What were some of your highlights?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but what I'll say is I shared with you that I had a job for 3 years that was located in Santa Rosa, and it was a work from home job, but I had to be in that office about once for a week a month, or maybe 2 weeks a month. So I would fly down there, spend the week down there, and fly back. Had to stay in a hotel, had to go out to eat. So I just started asking folks, what are your favorite wineries? Some of the folks that I work with, even going into some place, sitting at the bar, inevitably I talk to someone that was in the wine industry and I just start asking them about their wineries. So there are a lot of places that I got to know, and I asked for the boutique wineries, not the big ones. I don't want to call out any big names, specific names, but there are some big name wineries there.
We
And
know who they are.
right. And I never went. Actually, I take that back. I did go to one because I could get those wines anywhere. Also, I was in sales, and whenever we had people come to us for sales, we have potential or current clients or prospective clients come to us. What a great thing to do is to set them up with a wine tour, at the end of the day. We're either going to have dinner in a winery, we're going to go do a tasting, and we're going to go do that. So I found a lot of really, really good places down there. And how, we could talk about this forever. You know how it goes. You go to one place and you would think that going to the same winery would get boring if you don't know anything about wine. But then you start learning about wine, all the variables every year about where their fruit is coming from, what their blend is going to be this year. 1 year the blend is 88% something, 6% something, and 6% something else. The next year it could be 93% something and 7%. And then also where they get their fruit could change. They got their cab grapes from Nick last year. Well, you know what? Nick is in high demand and he raised his prices. So we can't get our cab grapes from Nick anymore. Or we're going to get half of them from Nick and we'll get half from Ron. And so it's all going to be different based on where they were. That to me was the exciting part of no matter where you went, it was always exciting. The tasting experience was always fantastic.
Yeah, I completely agree. Again, learning about wine is fascinating. As someone who doesn't know anything about wine, which we're going to talk about your experience coming into the wine world a little bit further, but just coming into those areas, especially those smaller areas like Sonoma, like the place that you've worked up in Woodinville, these smaller pockets of wine production, the people there are so welcoming. They're so giving as far as information and pleasantry and, all of that stuff. And all you have to do is ask. When you go to a place like that, like Santa Rosa or to Guernsville, or what an opportunity you have just to turn to your neighbor and say, hey, I would imagine you're in the wine industry. Tell me some of your favorites. So that's really, really great advice. I want to step back for just a second because I want to kind of do this in sequence, because your journey into your love of wine and travel too really started with your career in the Navy. Now, I understand from our previous conversations, you went into the Navy shortly after high school, and growing up in Camden, New Jersey, right across from where I grew up in Philadelphia, you got to see so many amazing things. Before I start into the wine thing, tell me some of your highlights from what you saw when you were working with the Navy.
Well, again, lots to unpack. So I went to the Naval Academy right out of high school. I actually went to some place called the Naval Academy Prep School first for a year. Then I went to the Naval Academy, became an aviator, went to Pensacola, Florida for my aviation training, ended up in San Diego for a while for some more in a squadron there, Jacksonville, Florida in a squadron. Also Patuxent River, Maryland, which is south of Washington, D.C., spent some time there. Most of my Navy moves were from coast to coast. Hey, here's California. Let's go back to D.C. Let's go back to Washington State. Let's go back to Florida. So I moved around quite a bit. When you're young, sometimes you don't appreciate the things that you were able to experience. And I just remember kind of complaining about the drive. I got to drive across the country several times, coast to coast. Right. And looking back on it, those were some great experiences.
Absolutely.
They really were. I got to see some great places, experience some great things, meet some great people. I will say the thing about the Navy, I think the military in general, lots of adventures, let's say. I was in an operational combat squadron during the war, not necessarily fun, but necessary to protect, support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And the people that I met in the Navy and came around here, I came away from that with some of the best and strongest relationships ever. Because if you're on a ship, I was deployed on an aircraft carrier, we live together, we work together, we experience the things in high stress environments together, things that bring people closer together. So all of the folks that I call my best friends are all folks that I was in the Navy with. Now, I have some friends that I grew up with that I'm still very close to, but I never lived with them. I never experienced it. I never was in a combat zone with them, so those relationships are different. But again, the relationships I think were the best, no matter where we were. And the great thing was sometimes we part, we're stationed someplace together for a couple of years, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe more years will pass. We end up being stationed together again, and we pick up right where it left off. It's like no time has passed. And a lot of these folks I haven't seen in 20 or more years, but I bet if I saw them tomorrow, we would pick up just like it was yesterday when we parted. And that's the thing that I love the most.
The brotherhood, if you will, the brotherhood, sisterhood in the Navy specifically, I can imagine in such close quarters, really does create some amazing bonds, between people. And I think that's awesome. And I'm so glad you have those ongoing relationships with those folks.
Yeah, it really does. And I'd be remiss on saying I am lucky because I did get to see the world. I got to travel to a lot of places I never thought I would see. Things when I was a kid. One of my favorite places to go when I was a kid was the library. I used to read atlases and encyclopedias. And I would look at all these pictures of the pyramids, the Eiffel Tower, all sorts of things, and wonder, I wonder if I could get to see that one day. Well, a lot of those things I got to see. So that I am thankful for that.
Yeah, childhood dreams. I love that come true.
Now, a lot of time was spent in the middle of nowhere in the ocean, too, which wasn't all that exciting. But I will say, if you've ever been on a cruise or been out to sea, you never realize there are so many stars in the sky until you get out into the open ocean.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm a city boy at heart, so spending a lot of my life in cities, I never really got to see the sky as well as you do when you're in the middle of the Caribbean or in the middle of the Pacific. It's absolutely amazing. I completely agree. Well, one of the stops that you made during your career with the Navy was in Monterey, California, which I have a huge affinity for Monterey. As my listeners know, I spent many, many years in that area and worked in Pebble Beach and worked in hospitality and wine and food in that area for so many years. And it's just such a magical, magical place. And that's where you kind of fell in love with wine. Tell us that story.
I did. So I was lucky enough to be selected to attend the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. So all of our services have places where military officers can earn advanced degrees that we need for jobs that we are going to perform. So I was lucky enough again to be selected to go there, and I had earned a degree master's degree in systems engineering. While I was there, I was working on a master's degree in engineering, so it wasn't all play. But while I was there, I was not a wine drinker. And now I enjoy craft beer. I'm a craft beer enthusiast as well. And then I just decided, I was like, maybe I should learn a little bit more about wine, because up to that point, I was not able to drink any wine without making a face. Just like, this is not for me. So I went into one of the wineries in the area and just asked, it's like, I'm not a wine drinker. How do I become one? What do you suggest? Yeah, so I started off with the lightest wines possible. I think it was a Gewürztraminer I tried, and then worked my way up through the whites. And it's one of those things, when you're a kid, I don't know if you drank whiskey or bourbon, but when you're a kid, you're like, oh my God, how can anybody drink this? And then sometimes with some of the things now, but you develop a taste for it. And so that began my journey with wine. And I got to really enjoy, I'm like, now I see what people enjoy about it. And again, as someone who just enjoyed it and didn't really try to figure out why, the next step was, okay, why do I like this? What's good about it? About the ones that I don't like? What was it that I didn't like about it?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing about just learning more and more. And then one day I went to dinner with some friends, and they only had red wine. And I'm like, okay, I'll try it. I've only been drinking these whites, but I'll try it. It's red. And I tried the red, and my life changed right after that. Delicious. My goodness, look at what I've been missing this whole time. So I believe it was a cab
Mm-hmm.
at the time, but still, I'm like, red. Now I have got to start trying all of these different reds. But again, in Monterey, that is where my journey with wine began.
I love that story for so many reasons. Again, Monterey is so close to my heart. I was the same way. I was not a wine drinker, coming from the Philadelphia area. It was all beer all the time, and not great beer either. So, and a little bit of whiskey. But, in culinary school, that helped me start develop my palate. But I didn't really know wine until I moved to Monterey. To Monterey County. And that's where the floodgates just opened, literally, and, amazing sips everywhere I turn. So you and I, have a lot in common in that regard.
Well, I have to share with you. Let me share
Please.
this with you. My journey in craft beer also started in Monterey.
Oh, okay.
I'm a craft beer guy, and I think I rolled into some place and asked for a Michelob Light or something like that. And the bartender's like, we don't have that here. And he's like, try this. And I tried it, and I'm like, this is the best beer I've ever tasted in my life. Tell me more. And so that really in Monterey, and then I'm saying, hey, Monterey could have made me an alcoholic. I don't know. But Monterey started the journey with beer too.
That's fantastic. And, you're up in Seattle now, and, Seattle is no slouch when it comes to beer production. I mean, absolutely. So many amazing places up there.
Yes, lots of great breweries here and wineries. More than anyone, right? Washington's the #2 wine producing state in the country. We have a lot of great wineries here. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah. Let's use this opportunity, this segue, if you will, to jump right into that. So if I remember the story correctly, you were just out and about again, and you just happened to run into a winemaker. And that's how you got into the tasting room up in Woodinville. So tell us a little bit more about that story.
You are right. And as you can maybe able to tell, I'm an extrovert. But this was when I was working back and forth in Sonoma. And I realized that, coming back and forth to Sonoma, and I realized that I knew more about the wine industry in Sonoma County than I did in Washington. So I was in a brewery in this town called Woodinville, Washington. We can talk a little bit more about Woodinville in a minute, but I'm in Woodinville at a brewery that's in the same district that a whole bunch of wineries are in. And I was just standing next to someone at the bar, and we started chatting. I asked him what he did. He goes, I'm the owner and winemaker at one of the wineries across the street. I go, really? Wow. I was like, how is that? Yeah, I just started asking him about it. We started chatting. I go, well, how do you staff your tasting room? He goes, I'm all volunteers. I'm like, do you need any more volunteers? I really like to learn. And it's like, all I'm looking for is to learn about the industry and how wine gets made. I don't know how it's made. There are a lot of things I don't understand, so maybe I can learn that from you. he's like, sure, just stop on by. So a couple of weeks later, I stopped by the tasting room. He sort of gave me the tour, told me what it would entail. And I'm like, I could do this. So I ended up working in there. It was only open on Saturday and Sunday from 1 to 5. So
Sure.
not very, very long, but there is, as you well know, you got to show up a little bit beforehand and prep everything. You got to stay afterwards, to make sure all the glasses, get washed.
Right.
And everything like that. And the place gets shut down. But I ended up doing that for 7 years.
Amazing.
I enjoyed it a lot. And really the only bad experiences I had, people come in intoxicated and you have to ask them to leave. And
Right.
these days people bring their kids, when they come wine tasting. And so there's a couple of folks that I've had to say, hey, this is a working winery, a light industrial area, and I can't have your kid running around in the areas that are off limits to everyone. Other than that, it was fantastic. I think people who are going out to taste wine are generally in a good mood. And it's fantastic just to see people enjoy the wine, to see the winemaker's reaction as people enjoy his wine. I had a lot of fun, had a lot of fun, some wine here and there. So it was really great.
Another great learning experience. I ran a tasting room for many years out in Monterey County, and I've seen my fair share of those people. I actually think we've met a few of the same people. Yeah, absolutely. And have stories for days. Obviously, you love to learn. You're an extrovert, so this is a perfect gig for you, volunteer gig. And as an aside, I don't know if my listeners even know that that's even a thing, that some wineries work on volunteers. So, especially in small towns like Woodinville in Monterey County, I know that was a thing as well, down in Paso Robles, places outside of Portland, in Oregon too. You might work for a bottle of wine, or you might work for a glass of wine, or, something along those lines. But those opportunities exist, so if that's something that you're interested in doing, what Ron did, walk in and ask. What's the worst thing they could say is no, and then you walk out with a glass of wine.
Absolutely. Just ask how they staff their tasting room. They use volunteers. I mean, probably, I don't know how much people post on the internet and things like that, but the best thing to do, especially with the smaller ones, is just go and ask. And it really is, it's a happy place. Again, people come in, they're in great moods. People are out having a good time. Lots of bachelorette parties coming through, ironically, no bachelor parties, but, bachelorette
They're
parties.
over at the breweries.
Yeah, birthday parties. People are just out having fun, which is really great. If you ever fly, if you've ever lost your luggage, do you know the place that you go where you lose your luggage?
Yes.
That's got to be the worst place in the world, right? Because everyone that goes in there is upset. Let's say, right? The winery, I think, is a complete opposite of that, right? Because everybody that's coming in is in a good mood, as opposed to that place, everybody's coming in a bad mood because their luggage is lost. And it's completely the opposite. It's different, happy place. Again, those negative experiences I had in the 7 years that I worked there were 2 experiences that I had, and then I got on with the rest of the day. And the reason I remember them, because it's just so odd,
Right.
For something like that to happen.
Well, I love that contrast that you just made between a wine tasting room and the lost luggage booth at the airport. I can't imagine any two antithesis of one another.
Right?
That's fantastic. You've had this great journey in wine, from not drinking at all to tasting it, and then developing your palate over many, many years. Let's talk about what you would do in the tasting room when someone would approach you with the same story that Ron had when he walked into a tasting room. If they didn't like wine, or they had never tried wine, where would you start them, and how would you walk them through that process?
Well, probably like I did. I didn't have anyone tell me like, oh, hey, I don't know anything about wine. But there are some folks that's like, oh, I only drink white wines. I only drink red wines. Not that I'm trying to convince anyone, but it's like, hey, there was a time when I only drank white wines, and I tried the red, and it really changed my life. If they ask me for my recommendation, I go, well, I'm not sure my recommendation is going to be any good to you. And here's why. I like olives. I like asparagus. I like broccoli. And if
Hmm.
you don't like those things, if you hate those things, then my recommendation to wine for you isn't going to be any good, because like I hate coffee. I can't drink coffee. I just don't like it. And some people love it and live for it, right? So again, our tastes are totally different. So my recommendation to you, as far as what I like, is probably not going to be any good based on the differences in taste. So where we would start is, okay, is there a wine that you like? Well, what varietal is it? Is it a Chardonnay? Is it a Pinot Gris? Is it something like, but is it a Merlot? Let's start there, right? And let's start with that. Okay, so now so you said the wine that you said you liked is a Merlot. So here's one of our Merlots. Give that a shot. Okay, so now why do you like that? And so there's one of those things. And then there's so many. When I worked in Woodinville, there were about 100 wineries in Woodinville at the time. Now there's about 150 or so, or closing in on 150. And so what I used to add, they used to like, where should we go next? I go, well, again, what kind of varietals do you like? So Nick's winery, Nick has really, really good Chardonnay. So if you like Chardonnay, you should go to Nick's winery. So-and-so's winery over there, if you like Merlots, these people over here are known for their Merlots. Go there and try that. And so again, I tried to focus more on the varietal and why they liked it. And then, okay, now let's do some similar varietals. So if you say Pinot Noir, well, that's a light red. So let's try a Garnacha here, which is a light red, or here's a blend that we have that's a lighter red blend. Let's start that. So I try to take what little I knew and try to give them some recommendations that aligned with what they already liked. And again, if there was someone that didn't know absolutely anything about wine, I would tell them what I did. It's like, I don't think you're going to find one of those here, but would you consider the lightest white you can find? Just go somewhere, ask what's the really lightest white that they have and start there, and then work your way up.
Absolutely the way to do it. And, if you're listening and wine tasting is not something that you've done or haven't thought about doing or have thought it and want to get into, this is a great way to go about it. The people, and I'm speaking very generally, of course, the people who work at wine tasting rooms are some of the happiest people on earth, besides working at Disney. I mean, what an amazing gig, to be in a tasting room. You just have happy people, coming in all the time, especially later in the afternoon. Just ask them, just ask the question, what would you recommend? I'm not a wine drinker, or I have very little experience with wine. What would you recommend? They're going to tell you. And I love the point that you made about how you would recommend other tasting rooms in the area. That's something that you will find in a lot of those small wine producing communities as well. Is when I worked in Monterey County, very specifically in Carmel Valley, which is a small village inside of Monterey County, but a lot of tasting rooms were in Carmel Valley because it was closer to the rural areas where the wines were grown and so on. And there was a term that I used to use with the other competing businesses, in the area, and that was co-opetition. We were all there for the same reason, was to sell our wine and to introduce people to our wine and so on. And every week someone would walk into my tasting room and say, I don't like this, or I don't like that, but I do like this and I do like that. And my response would always be, well, I don't have that, but go see Joe down the street. Joe makes the greatest Cabernet Sauvignon in Carmel Valley. You got to go see Joe. Or if you're only a Chardonnay fan, I only had a couple of Chardonnays on my list, for a couple of years, go see Sally down the street. Sally does amazing Chardonnay. So if that's what you like, go out and explore, have a good time, stop for lunch in between, and make a day out of it. I love the fact that we can do that in the small towns, and in some cases, the big towns too. I would consider Santa Rosa a larger wine producing town, and you got experience there. But I think the sentiment was about the same in Santa Rosa, because I've spent a lot of time in Santa Rosa over the years, and I would say there's a lot of co-opetition going on in Santa Rosa as well. But the point that I'm making is, if you walk into a tasting room, the first one that meets your eye, don't feel like you have to be stuck there. if what they're offering you is not what you like. Because what is my motto, everybody? It's you drink what you like and don't drink what you don't like. So if Ron doesn't have the wines, that you're looking for, come see Nick, or vice versa. That's the point of what I'm saying.
You're right. You made a really good point. And I was surprised at the cooperation between all the winemakers.
Yeah.
There was no sense of competition. It was all, how can we help each other? Some of the larger wineries had capital equipment, and the small ones don't. So they had to share the capital equipment. Hey, so-and-so's got a bottling line. Okay. But they also rent out their bottling line to all the small wineries out there. And there's a couple folks out there that had a bottling line in a truck that they would drive, and, a portable thing. And the same thing with all the labeling, right? All of that stuff.
Yep.
And the augers during crush, everything, it's like only a few wineries had that equipment, so they would share it, right? Forklifts, hey, your forklift driving, all that stuff, which is what winemakers have to learn how to do, right? That's probably the most obscure thing I learned. Hey, as a winemaker, first thing you need to know how to do is drive the forklift, okay?
Right.
So, but I was really, really surprised at how cooperative everyone was. And I never once heard someone say something bad about another winemaker's product.
Yep. It's all about community. It's all about people, and it's all about serving the customer in communities like that. And, if you haven't figured it out, I love propping up the little guys on this show. I've talked about wine in Indiana. I've talked about wine in Virginia. I've talked about wine down here in Southern California, which isn't necessarily known as a big wine producing area, but we do make some wine down here, and amazing places in Oregon and Washington. I've got a guest coming up in a few weeks who is an Arizona wine expert,
Wow.
So, right, exactly, right. Arizona wine, what's going on there? Wines sparkling wines out of New Mexico. Let's prop these people up. Yes, California wine is the standard or the benchmark, if you will, of American winemaking, but there are so many amazing, wonderful wine producing regions in the area. All 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii, are producing wine right now. So go try some wine from Missouri, people. Absolutely. Or up there in Woodinville, Washington.
Yes, I remember that. There's at least one winery in all 50 states, and some better than others, right? I mean, and
Of course.
That's due to the climates. But there are some people out there making some great wines. Just give it a shot.
Yeah, most definitely. So we're going to wrap it up. And I mean, we've talked a lot about it, up to this point, but just give us one more piece of advice for someone who was in your shoes today and how they can get into it. Go explore, enjoy wine, have a good time. What's your one piece of advice?
I'll sum it up this way, sort of be adventurous, be willing to learn, and be willing to ask, right? Just ask, right? Be willing to learn. There is a lot to learn. Just like anything else, you will find that the more you know, the more more you find out there is to know. And there are a lot of variables in wine. And as somebody with an engineering background, there's a lot of variables there. That's kind of cool, and now I understand how it could be different, because I used to think, as I talked about earlier, it must be boring to live somewhere that's right next to a winery. I mean, a wine's the same all the time. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. So again, be willing to learn, get a couple of books. There's some really, really good books out there. I was going to mention one, but I won't, because it's my favorite book, because it's really good and it's approachable, and I'm sure you can find it out there if you need to. But start with things like that. Just walk into a winery, it's not going to kill you, and then just ask. If you want to work in a winery, what's it like to work in a winery? What's it like to work in a tasting room? How do you staff your tasting room? Oh, if they pay people, well, ask, hey, do you know anybody that uses volunteers in their tasting room? Some of people use family, some use not, but I guarantee you, if you're in one of those areas with more than a couple of wineries, you can find one that's looking for volunteers. And if you're lucky enough to volunteer, just be a sponge, just learn everything you can, keep people happy. And you and I could probably talk a long time about tasting room dynamics, but
absolutely,
keep wine in people's glasses and smiles on their faces. You're good to go.
Yep. Well, I was hoping that's exactly what you would say. Learn, absorb as much as you can, be adventurous, be open. Hey, and listen to the Pour and Explore podcast, people.
Yes,
That's that's the best way to go about this. And there are some great books out there as well. Ron, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Enjoyed the conversation. Hope to talk again soon.
My pleasure, my friend.
I told you that would be fun. Huge thanks to Ron Higgs for joining me today and sharing not only his wine journey, but his stories from around the world, from native ships to boutique wineries, and from reluctant sips to passionate pours. Thank you so much, Ron. And if you've ever wondered how to get into wine, without all the pretension, Ron's advice says it all. Be curious, be adventurous, and just ask. Come on, everybody. It's as easy as that. Wine should be joyful. Wine should be all inclusive and maybe just a little bit unexpected. If this episode inspired you to visit a tasting room, try a new varietal of wine, or even volunteer behind the bar, please let me know. I would love for you to hit me up on Instagram or TikTok, Facebook. You can find me there too. Head over to thewineguy.vin, thewineguy.vin, and that is going to keep you in the loop on wine events, tastings that I've got coming up. Book your own private tasting with me, the Wine Guy. I can do it in person down here in the San Diego area or online if you'd like. And certainly, if you'd love this episode, even if you liked this episode a little bit, people, you want to come back for more, please leave a review, please subscribe, please follow, and share it with your wine-loving friends. And again, super appreciative of you for listening. Thanks for staying to the end. Until next time, keep wondering and wondering. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Pour and Explore. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, or your questions, so you can drop me a line at cheers@thewineguy.vin. That's cheers@thewineguy.vin. Or let's connect on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. Grab those links on my website at thewineguy.vin. Until next time, let's keep wondering and wandering. Cheers, everyone.